So welcome, Robert, to the CFI Hustings. We're very grateful for you making the time. We know that you're running around the country and running around to all sorts of associations. We're going to keep this as informal as we can. And if I may begin by, I know that you've got 5 pledges, I think, if I remember rightly. The 3 most important things you will want to achieve as leader of the opposition.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Stuart, for the kind introduction, and to all my many friends within CFI who are here tonight. What do I want to achieve by standing for leader of this party? Well, number one, I want to beat Labour and win the next general election. That is the most important task that we have ahead of us. So I want to get this party back on the road. I want to dust ourselves down. I want to ensure that we are in fighting shape. That means ensuring that the operation of our party, which incidentally I see Stephen Massey here this evening, Stephen has been fantastic at leading the party in recent months. And so we're very grateful to Stephen. But there's clearly a big job for us in the months ahead to get the party back into fighting shape and to make it once again a democratic, mass membership organisation with the best possible campaigning we can in all parts of the country. So number one, get our party's operation back into shape. Number two, to be a strong opposition. It is clear in 100 days that this Labour government is causing immense harm to our country in many, many different ways. But on the issues that you and I in this room care passionately about, it is not a friend of Israel. Let's just be honest with ourselves. We see that in all sorts of different ways, from restoring funding to UNRWA, taking away licenses for purely synthetic, superficial reasons to make David Lammy feel good about himself and hurt our relationship with Israel. We could go on. So we need to make sure that we are fighting Labour tooth and nail and giving this country the strong opposition that it needs. And then lastly, we've got to change our offer to the public. And this is at the heart of my pitch. I want us to end the drama. I want us to have no excuses, to be painfully honest about the mistakes that we've made when we've been in government, and to have a very clear plan as to how we will turn the party around, turn our country around. And that, Stuart, is what you would get if I am leader of this party. I don't trade in platitudes. I have very clear and specific policies for the big challenges that are facing this country right now. And I think the public are yearning for us as politicians and as a party to have a clear plan, to have answers to those challenges, so that we can begin the long road of regaining the trust and the confidence of the public that we've just lost at the general election. That is how we get back into contention. That is how we win the next general election.
Some would say that one of the problems of our party has been that we're too divided. That there are, I'm not going to use the left and right, there's pro-Brexit, we've been fractured. Now, some of those divisions haven't gone away, and I hear what you say, but how will you deal with that in bringing the party together again?
Well, firstly, I don't think that politics is about left or right in the way that it's been characterized. And I don't think this leadership election is that either. What I care about is the common ground of British politics. That is where I think millions of our fellow citizens are. And I want to position the Conservative Party firmly in the common ground. And all the issues that I campaign on, securing our borders, being tough on crime, reducing taxes, a more realistic attitude to net zero, building homes for young people, ensuring that we have an NHS that actually works for people, a small state, not a big one that keeps failing. These are things that most people in this country care about. And I think if we apply ourselves to specific answers to those questions, then we can win. I think we've got to bring the Conservative family back together again. I want to heal the party, and I think I'm the right person to do that. Some of you know me very well in this room, others less so. I'm a collegiate person. I've served in the government of each of the last 5 Conservative prime ministers, and they were a varied bunch of people, weren't they? Let's be honest. But if I can work with each of them, I think I can bring the parliamentary party back together as well. I don't want us just to be a Twitter account. We're the world's oldest and most successful political party. We're better than that. That's why in this leadership election, I have spoken about specific policies. Because I think that's what the public want. That is how we'll regain their trust and their confidence. And it's also the way that we unite the parliamentary party. Because if we just say, well, there'll be a plan, in months or years' time, that is a recipe for more disunity, for more infighting. So let's use this leadership election to settle some of the big questions facing our party now. I also think, incidentally, that is more respectful to you, the members, because I think you deserve to have a say on some of those big questions, not just to say, well, they'll be settled in a smoke-filled room in Westminster at some point in the future. I want you to have a say on, for example, whether we leave the European Convention on Human Rights or not and secure our borders. These big questions deserve to be settled now, and then unite the parliamentary party around those solutions to the big questions. That's my plan.
So not everybody in this room will know, but you were a leader in terms of trying to get Hezbollah to be prescribed. It took a long time, but you in the House of Commons were leading that. Can you talk us through what happened?
Well, I wasn't alone. There were many of us who were part of that campaign, and you, of course, were one of them. I see others around the room, like Lord Pickles, like Stephen Crabb, and others. And so we were a group of comrades in that battle. But we fought.
Never been called a comrade before.
Well, you can. We're brothers in arms. But we fought to
appeal to the left of the party.
Of course, yeah. No, and I've been too busy with the right of the party. I need to be. It's a big tent now. But seriously, we fought to ensure that Hamas and indeed Hezbollah were fully prescribed, and that was the right thing to do. Imagine how foolish we would feel today as a country if we'd followed the advice of some, including within our own party, and certainly within the Foreign Office, who said these things were impossible, that they would harm our diplomatic relations with various groups. The next battle is obviously the IRGC. And I've organized debates in Parliament with your help and with CFI colleagues on that front. And the advice is the same. It's from some quarters within the civil service and within our own party that we can't do this because it will make it more difficult to have back channels to the regime in Iran.
Well, back channels have helped, haven't they?
Oh, of course, yeah. No, of course. That's been hugely successful. So the same arguments are being made today as they were back then. They were wrong then, they're wrong today. We should prescribe the IRGC, and then we should say very clearly that terrorists are terrorists. And our party will never stand. Thank you.
Okay. So let me throw it open. I remind you, as I did earlier, these are questions, not speeches, and I do want you to introduce yourself and where you're from. I'm going to try and look for different people. So there's a gentleman here who's going to get a microphone. Name and where you're from. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Roger Smith, and I'm from Swindon.
Where?
Swindon in Wiltshire.
Well, it's good of you to come all this way.
I actually worked 10 minutes away. It wasn't that much of a deal. So, but I'm grateful for your concern. So thank you. So when I go out canvassing, so I was a borough councillor until Partygate and Boris did me in. The issues that you hear on the doorstep are very different to the issues that we're talking about tonight. But one of the issues is housing for young people, and you mentioned that. So, Jane, I'd love to know, and I should say I work in the housing sector, I've done for 40 years. What would you do differently in terms of housing? Because I think pandering to the NIMBYs, which is what we've been doing for too long, has been an abject failure.
Yeah, well, very good question. Well, look, we've got to build more homes. Oh dear. Our country has too few homes, doesn't it? So we need to get building again. And we also can't be a party that stands for growth, for lower taxes, for business, unless we are also for fixing the system, which is inhibiting the building of those homes, the building of factories and data centers, the investment that our country desperately needs. So I want us to be different. And that will mean building in our big cities in particular. And so I want us to do radical reforms to get building and densifying and regenerating places like inner East London. And that was a policy that I pursued as Housing Secretary. Back then, we got the number of new homes in this country being built up to the highest level since 1987, since Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. And it fell back a lot in the years after that. So we've got to get back to that. Do supply-side reforms, take on our sclerotic planning system. And Labour aren't going to do this. You can see what Angela Rayner is proposing. She's actually cutting the housing targets in some of our biggest cities to spare the blushes of left-wing mayors like Sadiq Khan, and hiking them in places where it's far more difficult to build, or in fact there's no demand. She's doing a 1,000% increase in the housing target in Redcar, for example, whilst reducing it by a third in London. That is not a good policy for the economy or for young people. So I want us to reclaim the mantle of home ownership and be the party that helps young people onto the ladder.
The gentleman in the coat who's clearly ready to leave, I think.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen and ladies. My name is Haider Jabbar. I'm in London, in Chiswick. So my question is, from the prime ministers you've worked for, 5, is that correct? 5 of them. Which one was the toughest to work for, and which one was the easiest? And what would you learn if you become prime minister from the mistakes of these prime ministers? Thank you.
A very good question. I've been asked variants of this before, and they're never easy to answer, these questions. I mean, I think they all have good qualities that we can learn from. I mean, I respect David Cameron for the professionalism and competence that he brought to government, which I think is important. I respect the fact that he was a fiscal conservative and with George Osborne took care to restore our public finances, one of the big achievements of our time in office. I respect the public service that Theresa May brought to the job, and indeed to being a constituency MP, something that I think is important, because we have a job to do as a party now, don't we, to restore the brand of our party as being one of public service and integrity. I enjoyed working with Boris for the joie de vivre and the campaigning ability that he brought to it, which also matters. Liz, well, Liz did say she was going to take the embassy back to Jerusalem, which I also support, and so I agree with her on that front. And look, I think Rishi was an incredibly diligent and hardworking and decent public servant who's a good friend of mine, and helped to restore our reputation for sound management of the public finances that was lost in the immediate aftermath of the mini-budget, and I think the mini-budget did immense harm, actually, to our reputation, and we need to be honest about that. So there were good qualities of all of those prime ministers. What I would say is that, in fact, perhaps bar Liz, none of them had a very clear sense of where do they want to take this country. And I don't think we've actually had a prime minister, probably since Margaret Thatcher, who went into office knowing exactly where he or she wanted to take this country. That is what I want us to do differently. I want us to use this period in opposition wisely, to draw up the policies, to have a sense of our enduring principles and values as a party, so we know exactly what we want to do next time if we're lucky enough to get back into government. So we're not knocked off course by events, by the media, by judicial reviews and NGOs and all of the things that are thrown at you when you're in government. That's why I say we want to change the party to deliver for the public, because I want to actually deliver a genuinely conservative vision of this country. That's what I want to achieve. Because if I think of what hurts me about the last 5 years, is we won this incredible gift of an 80-seat majority. I was 5 years old the last time we had a Conservative government with a majority like that, when Margaret Thatcher won in 1987. And we have precious little to show for it. Let's never be in that position again. Let's win the next general election and win for a purpose, to transform this country.
So, gentleman here, third row, also got a coat on. Is it cold in here? Oh, sorry about that.
Ian Wilson, Royal Kingston and Surbiton Conservatives. Kemi, in answer to a question, said she did not consider leaving the ECHR was a silver bullet to all our problems with immigration. I would guess you do. Can you tell us why?
Well, I don't consider it to be a silver bullet either, but I do consider it to be an essential foundation to fixing our borders. And I think if we don't do it, there's frankly no future to our party. I want us to be in government. I don't want us to be in opposition. And I think if our party doesn't have an answer to how you secure our borders. If our party's position is there'll be a plan, but I don't know what it is, and it'll be ready in a few years' time, manana, then we're finished. And I'm not prepared to do that. I'm not prepared to do that because we've got to get back into government. I'm not auditioning to be leader of the opposition. I want to be a future prime minister of this country. And that is the difference. That is the difference between us. 2 weeks ago, a Ugandan man who we were trying to deport from this country had his deportation quashed by the courts. This is a man who had clubbed somebody to death in North London. And the court said that he couldn't be deported to Uganda, citing the ECHR, because Uganda didn't have good enough mental health care. That is not an example which is rare. I could name dozens other examples like this. I'm not prepared for these things to continue. I'm not prepared for us to have foreign criminals on our streets, to have terrorists clogging up our prisons, to not be able to secure our borders, all because of our human rights apparatus. I believe that the country of Magna Carta, of habeas corpus, of our own Bill of Rights back in the day, is capable of securing and defending our own freedoms and liberties. I want to bring that home to our own parliament. And just to the question as to whether this can be reformed, because I know that's the sort of counter-argument that's put out. There's 46 member states, from Iceland to Andorra to Turkey. Reform is a fantasy. Ask anybody, what articles do they want to be reformed? What is the process? What do they think is the timetable? I've asked those questions to many people, including my opponents in this contest. No one has ever come forward with any actual proposals. So let's just be honest with ourselves. It can't be reformed. It's leave or remain. I'm for leave. I'm for fixing these problems, winning back the voters we've lost, and the confidence of the public, and getting us back into government.
The gentleman at the back, also with a coat. No, he's got a jacket on. Very nice.
Yes.
Okay, name please.
Yes, Ahmed Imtiaz, and I'm based in Hammersmith. You rightly talked about investment. One thing I'd like to bring your attention is domestic pension houses. They hardly invest in UK equities or UK funds. They invest overseas, all of their portfolio. Do you think, as we need investment, maybe it's a good idea of putting a requirement of 5% or 4% of their portfolio that should go into the UK market at least? What's your take on this? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. One that we've grappled with as a country for a long time. When I was a Treasury Minister several years ago, we were tackling this very problem, seeing how can we ensure that our domestic pension funds are investing in infrastructure, for example, in this country, in the way that would be perfectly normal if we were in the United States or Canada. In fact, some of the greatest investors in this country are pension funds from those places, like Canadian teachers' pension funds. But yet our own don't do so to the same degree. So I think suggestions like yours are valid and things we should be considering. We've got to harness the investment that we have here and put that to ensure that the growth industries in our country, like life sciences and technology, is accessing the investment that it needs. That housing, like social housing, that transport and regeneration and utilities are getting the benefit of our own pension funds. It's a big challenge. It's one that I've been involved in the past, and we should definitely take forwards.
So, as many of you know, the CFI is run by a small professional team plus a group of 5 directors, unpaid, who help support. And for those of you who don't know Adam Cannon, you're about to know him. Adam is a lawyer, unfortunately. And I think you've got a question, Adam. And if you haven't, you have now.
Thanks, Stuart. I probably better ask about the ECHR, given I'm a lawyer. What I want to try and understand is, if we do leave the ECHR, what protections are you going to put in place to cover? It's not just about issues about immigration. There are so many aspects of the ECHR which are so important. Things like modern slavery, freedom of speech. There are many issues there. What protections are you going to put in place? Because we don't want a situation, as we had post-Brexit, where we had Brexit and then had to deal with all the problems afterwards. So how are you going to deal with the problems before?
Yeah, very good question. I have a plan. I've thought about this in great detail. I've traveled around Europe. I've spoken to our counterparts, interior ministers, immigration ministers. I've spoken to some of our great jurists here in the UK, like Lord Jonathan Sumption, who advocate exactly what I'm planning. And I think we can write our own British Bill of Rights. We thought about that in the past, but concluded that you couldn't do it whilst you remained within the ECHR. And I think in many respects, this can be stronger in its protections than the ECHR, particularly to things that we conservatives care about, like freedom of speech, for example, which I think is in danger in this country as across the West. And so we could write something that we are proud of, that is a beacon to democracies and aspirant democracies around the world, and which protects the freedoms and the liberties of the British public. But the difference would be this: if our Parliament wants to take action to put the interests of the British public first, it would be able to do so. That would mean that we could secure our borders, we could get terrorists off our streets and out of our country, and we wouldn't essentially have laws being made by activist judges in Strasbourg that none of us in this room signed up to. That would be the difference, and I think that would be an important step forward for our country.
Very good. There's a lady over there. Okay, we're coming. Microphone's coming.
Thank you. I want to know from you, Robert, how you will put pressure on the Labour government in terms of dealing with the grooming gangs. Because really, I can't see them doing much about it. They'll just sweep it under the carpet, and the criminals will resort to the ECHR.
You didn't give us your name.
I'm Dr. Harsha Jani, and I'm from Hendon Conservatives.
And you're a doctor of?
Neuroscience.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah. Well,
She's watching you.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's a very important question, and it's one that deserves a lot more airtime than we have today. And it pains me that so few politicians speak about this. If you look at some of the Labour MPs that have represented communities where there have been grooming gangs and scandals around this, so few of them have really fought against this, have raised it, put their head above the parapet, been willing to speak out against it. It was an issue that, to an extent, I was involved in as community secretary when we urged councils in some of those places to take action. I see Eric Pickles here, who was involved in similar issues when he was my predecessor as community secretary. We need to be willing to have the courage of our convictions, to stand up, to voice these things, not to be fearful of putting community relations above the protection of children and the enforcement of our laws. And that speaks to a broader truth, doesn't it? That across a range of issues in our society today, I worry that the police, that public institutions like local councils, and frankly a lot of politicians are too fearful to stand up and speak the truth. And that is leading to a creeping sense that there are two tiers in our society, that people are not willing to enforce the law without fear or favor. I've seen this myself in some of the campaigns that I've fought. For example, when I've spoken out against Islamist extremism, where I've had people bombarding me with abuse, with tweets and emails, sometimes with death threats. Even in the House of Commons, people have accused me of racism and extremism myself for just speaking the truth about these issues. We have to have the courage of our convictions and to stand up for the silent majority in our country who need politicians to be calling out these injustices and seeking practical solutions.
Just an extension of that, what would be close to the hearts of everybody in this room is the difficulties that Jewish students are facing on campus. I don't think we should take this lightly. And there are things that are going on which beggars belief that goes on in 2024. I'm sure you don't have a solution, but what more can we do to support our Jewish students?
Well, I've been involved in this issue for some time. When I was the community secretary, I worked with the Union of Jewish Students. We wrote to all universities across the United Kingdom, urging them, pushing them to sign up to the ECHR definition of anti-Semitism as a basic standard, a step forward for them, with a degree of success. When there were universities which fell below that standard, sometimes shockingly so, I fought that. I remember Bristol University, for example, which had failed to take action against a university professor who I would argue had been anti-Semitic. I wrote to the university, I asked to meet them. I went to see the chancellor of the university to put pressure on them to take action against this. And so I think we have to be relentless in pushing universities to take seriously the care and the concerns that we have for Jewish students on campus. It's an unfinished revolution. In fact, I think it's probably gone backwards, because since October the 7th, I see countless examples of Jewish students feeling unwelcome on campus, not having the normal experiences that I had as a student and I would want my children to have as well. I have somebody working in my office who you may know, Dov Foreman, fantastic young person who's very active on social media. And he's a student at University College London, and I'm sure wouldn't mind me telling you his experiences on campus, where he's had to go into university time and again since October the 7th and walk past protests, mobs really, outside his own university lecture halls and libraries. And I'm appalled by that. We've got to be standing up for this, giving courage to those young students, but also being their friends and their allies and supporters. For my part, I've also played a role beyond that in, for example, taking forward new legislation to stop the boycott of Israel by all of our public institutions, by taking forward the Holocaust Memorial that we're trying to build outside Parliament, which has been a long road, I have to say. But we are slowly getting there, I hope. But each of these are small but important ways in which we can fight this battle, take on public institutions, raise awareness, ensure that we're fighting anti-Semitism wherever we see it.
Thank you. There's a rabbi here. There's a number of rabbis, but there's a particular rabbi friend of mine, Rabbi Roselaw, who is the rabbi of Marble Arch Synagogue. And I'm not going to preempt his question, but he's had a lot of difficulty because it's there where often these Palestine marches, pro-Palestinian marches start, and when the congregants are coming out of synagogue at that time. I'm not sure he's going to ask that question, but Rabbi.
So Lord Pollock is also a prophet as well as a... so I remember the Lord's...
Flattery will go everywhere with Stuart.
I'm Daniel Epstein, the rabbi of the Western Marble Arch Synagogue, and as a rabbi of that synagogue, just 300 yards from Marble Arch, and my colleague, actually, Rabbi Barry Lehrer, who's the rabbi of the Great Portland Street Synagogue, which is just behind this wall over here, we've suffered serious degradation to our communities and our community life for the last year as a result of these protests. In fact, my good friend Vicar Lincoln, Father Lincoln Harvey, who's at the Annunciation Marble Arch, also, we're talking about this together. Our communities are being affected on Saturday mornings by these marches. Attendance has gone down in our synagogue. The central London has become a no-go area for Jews in many ways while they're taking place, and they have a significant and cumulative impact on our Jewish community. In light of this, the ongoing public safety concerns, what specific measures will you take if you're a leader of the party and possibly Prime Minister to make sure you can make sure that central London is a place where everyone can feel safe? That's the first thing. And knowing that this, the conflicts in the Middle East will continue for some time soon, despite many people's best efforts to try and come to some conclusion, how would you protect and look after the Jewish community who wants nothing more than to be able to contribute to every society in which they live? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question, a very important one. And in fact, your synagogue was the very first one that I went to when I first met my wife, when we lived nearby, and I enjoyed visiting many times. Look, when I spoke at one of the vigils on Whitehall, in fact, the first one, the day after October the 7th, and I said then, I feel as strongly today, that a Britain without its Jewish community is not Britain. And so it is incumbent on all of us, whatever our faith, to defend the British Jewish community and to ensure that each and every member of it feels safe on our streets. And that is not the case today. It is demonstrably not the case. And so we've got to be better. For my part, I have tried to urge the police consistently to take action. You will have seen this. Sometimes I've been criticized for that. I urged the Metropolitan Commissioner to take action when the police failed to arrest somebody for shouting jihad off Oxford Street, when genocidal chants were broadcast on to Big Ben. I was criticized earlier in the summer for saying that if you shout in an intimidatory manner, Al Akbar on our streets, the law should be enforced. We need to ensure that the police are enforcing our existing laws without fear or favor. Matt Twist, the Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, has himself admitted now that some of those criticisms were valid and that the police's initial reaction to the protests was not the right one. I worked with Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary at the time. We both were in agreement that the protests should be banned, because although not everyone on the protests was obviously inciting extremism and terrorism, too many people were, and that collectively it was having an immensely damaging effect on the British Jewish community and on the city more generally. Because I don't think this is just anti-Israel or anti-Jewish, this is anti-British. We should not have people on our streets doing this. So what would I do if I was lucky enough to lead this party and ultimately to be Prime Minister? Well, I would urge the police to take action, to enforce our laws without fear or favour. If we need to enhance our laws, we should do. There may actually be a case to do that, so that you can't valorize terrorist organizations on our streets. And you have seen that. Even the other day, we saw that, didn't we? Last weekend, where there were people who were not arrested for saying that Hezbollah was a perfectly, satisfactory organization. That's ridiculous. And we have to have bravery ourselves. How absurd that Kay Burley said on Sky News that I might be inciting people for wearing a hoodie saying Hamas are terrorists. Inciting who? Supporters of Hamas? Well, they should be arrested themselves. So we should all have courage of our conviction. And for my part, I will continue to do everything I can to do that. And of course, I want to see that those organizations like CST that are supporting and defending the Jewish community have all the resources and the ballast they need to continue doing so. But we shouldn't live in a country where that's necessary. We shouldn't live in a country where perhaps people in this room have been trained as to how to protect kids outside school gates or outside synagogues, where people are wearing stab-proof vests to go about their business. This is wrong. We need to fundamentally change things and to fight anti-Semitism and to defend the laws of our country.
Thank you very much. Sorry, my voice is a bit low, but actually I would like to say...
Who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know who you are, but everybody doesn't.
I'm Dr. Wafiq Mustafa. I practice as a GP in Acton Town, and I live in Pimlico. And I wrote 4 books about the Middle East. What I'd like to thank Stuart for 15 years ago. He gave me a chance with Daniel Ronan to visit Israel. And actually, it was a turning point in my life to know about Israel and the conflict in the Middle East. What I want to say, that the current war will be the biggest change for 100 years, and will be changing the foreign politics in the world and in Europe particularly. So what's your view as a leader of the opposition and probably coming Prime Minister of Britain? Thank you.
Well, we all want to see peace, don't we, in the Middle East. We want to see the people of Israel, Palestinians, those living in Gaza and the West Bank, those in Lebanon, living in peace. But I think it's absolutely fundamental, and I've said this time and again throughout my time in politics, that we have to defend Israel's right to protect itself and its people. And that is absolutely critical. And I'm preaching to the choir, but we all are in agreement, aren't we? Israel is an immensely dangerous neighborhood. At every side, it's got enemies, Hamas, Hezbollah. It's got proxies of Iran. We need to be supporting Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, a staunch ally of the United Kingdom, giving them the support that they need to finish the job, to keep their people safe. And with me, as leader of this party, I will always be a very, very strong supporter of Israel. And you can see that in things I've done throughout my time in politics. In fact, I am sanctioned by Iran for holding a debate when I called for the IRGC to be prescribed. So not just today in this leadership contest, but year after year, I have stood by Israel, and I'm proud to do so and will continue doing so for as long as I'm in politics.
Let's just discuss the IRGC for a minute. Everybody here agrees that that should have happened. It didn't happen when we were in charge. Almost unlikely to happen under Labour if we didn't do it. What was it that held us back?
Well, there was a disagreement within government, wasn't there? You know that as well as I do. There were many of us who made the argument, including very prominent people within cabinet who went to the meetings of the National Security Council, who spoke in cabinet. I raised it in cabinet on a number of occasions, but there were others who wouldn't do it. And the argument that they made was the one that we said earlier, that we need to have a back channel to the regime, that this is useful to us and some of our international allies. I don't agree with that argument. I didn't then, I still don't today. It is remarkably similar to the argument that was made against prescribing in full Hamas and Hezbollah. That was a wrong argument. We would look extremely foolish if we hadn't prescribed both of those organizations today, and I would argue we look foolish that we didn't prescribe the IRGC. In opposition, the Labour Party said that they would do it. They seem to be backtracking now. We can hold them to account, urge them to do so, but ultimately this is a job for the next Conservative government. And you can be assured that if I became Prime Minister, I would do this. I would do this straight away. And then in a small way, perhaps it's only symbolic, but in a small way, we would send a signal that we are intolerant of terrorists, people who harm our interests and those of our allies around the Middle East and across the world. We should not be allowing this to persist. It is a stain, frankly, on our government that we didn't do this. We must correct it the next time we're in office.
Watching, we're going to have a couple of the lady here in the fourth row, maybe. 1, 2, 3, yep.
Brian Kapoor from Romney Marsh, which is in the Folkestone Hythe constituency. I noticed that you're very well dressed, and I assume you paid for your suit. I just wanted to ask you what you would do to perhaps control any creeping corruption and abuse of power in government.
Well, I can assure you I have bought my own suits and my own glasses and everything else. But on a serious note, well, you are right that one of the things we have to tackle as a party is to restore a sense of public service and integrity, because that has harmed the reputation of our party in recent years. And so if I was leader of the party, I would need to make sure we were upholding high standards, that where people fall below them, they pay a price for that. When we choose parliamentary candidates, we're choosing people who are real conservatives, who are people of substance, and people who will contribute to public life and entering it for all the right reasons. That's important. And I hope you can see from my record that the other way that we have to restore public trust in politics is by doing what we say we'll do. And I think it was immensely corrosive to our reputation that on some of the biggest issues facing our country, we said we would do things and we didn't deliver them. That was ultimately the reason I chose to resign from the cabinet at the end of last year, because I didn't want to be just another minister who made promises and broke them. I could see that was harming our party and harming our politics. And we've got to be better than that in the future. I want us to restore public trust in this party and in democracy more broadly, in the way we conduct ourselves and in the way we deliver for the public on the big issues facing this country.
There's a lady, did you want to ask a question? You did. Well, you're about to.
Hi, Robert. Nice to see you again. Thank you guys so much for putting this on. My name is Jamila. I'm Vice Chair of Kensington, Chelsea, Bayswater and Fulham. It's a very long-winded association. You mentioned very briefly that we need a realistic approach to net zero. And I feel like that term is red meat for reform voters, but it actually puts off our younger voters and sends them to very sinister parties like the Green Party. So how can we show that we're serious about fighting climate change?
Yeah, really good question. Well, I would argue that it's something that can unite people. I want us to cut our emissions. I'm not a climate change skeptic. But I don't want to do it by hurting working people and families and by deindustrializing our country. And I worry that we have chosen a method of reaching net zero which is unrealistic and which is going to be harmful to our economy, our national security, and to working people. So I want us to ensure that we invest in new nuclear, that we invest in technology and innovation more generally, which can be very exciting to all people, particularly young people. But they're also realistic about things like saying that gas is here to stay for the medium term. That Ed Miliband's policy of phasing out gas is just not realistic. And I've yet to meet anyone who really believes that that's possible.
Don't we want to phase out Ed Miliband?
Oh, I would love to phase out Ed Miliband. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who says that the grown-ups are back in charge, just look at Ed Miliband. So what I propose is that we do cut emissions, but we do it in a more sensible and pragmatic manner. And I think generally on these questions where you say, well, maybe we're playing to the gallery of reform, well, the difference between us must be that we're proposing serious solutions to these things and that we're seeking to persuade, not provoke people. And so in the language we choose and the answers that we find, we can be different and better than reform. And that's how we bring those voters back without losing people on the more liberal or left of British politics of the kind that you mentioned.
So I know there's lots more questions to have, but I'm conscious that Robert's day is not finished and he has other things and other meetings to go to. So for the final question, I shall turn to Hilda, the chairman, otherwise I'd get into trouble.
Hi, Robert. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. You have talked about a whole fantastic range of issues of things that you would like to do. If you became leader of the opposition, how would you unite our party? How would you re-energise the people that feel disenfranchised and disillusioned? And how would you reignite that excitement of a broad church?
Yeah, very good. A really good question. Thank you, Hilda. Look, I want us to unite again. We've got to end the disunity. And I think that you do that by ensuring that the party focuses on the things that the public really care about. And it's pretty clear whether you're a Labour voter, Reform voter, Lib Dem voter, or you didn't vote at all. The things the public are most concerned about are the economy, the NHS, immigration, the really key things that affect working people in this country, wherever you live. So what I've tried to do in this leadership election is focus on the practical, serious policy solutions to those challenges. I don't want the Conservative Party to go down rabbit holes. I want it to stay focused on the things that the public care about the most. And I have a plan as to how we do that, a plan that's ready to go on the 2nd of November. And then I think people have got to unite around those things. And the way to unite is not to talk in platitudes or empty rhetoric, but it is to focus on the real solutions. And that's what I would like to offer us as a party if we move forward. And I believe we can do it. You know, the age of the 5 families, 1 nation, you know, all these different groups, that needs to come to an end, doesn't it? We just got to be one Conservative family now, working together to hold Labour to account and to win the next general election. That's what I want to do. I'm convinced that we can do it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been an unusual CFI event. Partly because there's no food, and we apologise for that, and we can make that up on another occasion. But you know, we have been very fortunate to have had both candidates here tonight, both of whom had no idea of the questions. They've not been asked any of these sorts of questions before, but no idea of the questions we were going to ask. There was nothing, you know, like Prime Minister's questions pre-prepared or anything. And I think we've enjoyed the opportunity to hear from you, Robert. And I think as Stephen will arrange for ballots to go out to everybody, as I said a bit earlier, people here are again unusual in that they were able to see you in the flesh and hear what you had to say. So thank you for finding time for us. You always have done, and I'm grateful. And to the CFI to the CFI team for putting this on in a couple of days. Fantastic. And to all of you, just to remind you that this is perhaps the most difficult time in my lifetime for Israel. Your support in everything that you do is deeply grateful. Keep at it. Thank you.